He was the kind of man history almost forgot, not because he did little, but because he arrived too early, before crime had a language, before investigation had a method, before Britain even understood what a detective could be. Long before Sherlock walked the foggy streets of London in fiction, there was a real man walking them in truth, studying every footprint, every broken window, every whisper of a clue, trying to solve crimes in a world that didn't believe crimes could even be solved. His name wasn't famous, not like Holmes, not like Moriarty. He didn't have novels written about him, or pipe smoke swirling around his silhouette. But he had something more important. He had the burden of being the first to look at chaos and say, there is a pattern. The first to look at violence and say, there is a motive. The first to look at a scene and believe that truth can be uncovered if you simply know how to look. This story begins in the 1780s, when Britain was changing faster than anyone could understand. Factories were rising, cities swelling, and people moving in numbers never seen before. With them came opportunity, and with opportunity came crime. Not the clumsy crimes of isolated villages, but the new crimes of crowded streets, pickpockets moving like ghosts in marketplaces, burglars slipping through unlocked windows, murderers hiding among thousands of strangers. Ordinary people feared this new world, but one man saw it differently. To him, crime wasn't a storm to panic in. It was a puzzle to solve. His name was Jonathan Wild, and he would become the closest thing Britain had to a detective, long before the word detective even existed. But his story was not simple. It was not clean. In fact, he was both the hunter and the hunted, the enforcer and the criminal, the solver of problems and the creator of them. A dual life so strange, so twisted, that even fiction writers later borrowed pieces of his legacy. Most people don't know this. Before official detectives, criminals and crime fighters lived in the same shadows. There were no police departments, no structured investigations, no forensic teams, no fingerprinting, no organized patrols. If you were robbed, you were expected to solve the case yourself, or live with the loss forever. And that is why Jonathan Wild rose to power. Because people were desperate. They needed someone, anyone, with the ability to find what was lost. And Wild had that ability, or at least he convinced people he did. He built a reputation in the underworld as the one man who could retrieve stolen goods when no one else could. Housewives who lost precious jewelry came to him crying. Merchants missing their cargo begged at his feet. And somehow, Wild always delivered the missing item within days. People began to whisper that he had a gift, that he could sense criminal intentions, that thieves feared him, that he could walk into any tavern in London and know exactly who had committed what crime. But the truth was far stranger. Jonathan Wild wasn't tracking criminals. He was managing them. Behind the curtains, hidden from the public, he created Britain's first organized criminal network. He controlled thieves like a puppeteer, assigning them targets, taking a share of the profit. And then, when the victim came to him, begging for help, he simply ordered the thief to return the stolen item so he could look like the hero. It was twisted, brilliant, and the foundation for something no one saw coming, Britain's first real system of tracking crimes. Because even though he was corrupt, Wild was forced to think like a detective. He needed to know how thieves worked, how they moved, how they selected targets, how they escaped, how they hid the goods. Every detail of the criminal mind became a piece of knowledge he used to build power. And by accident, or perhaps by ambition, he became the first man in Britain who truly understood crime. People believed they were watching a miracle. They thought Wilde was the only man who could see into the darkness and bring back what had been stolen. His fame spread so quickly that even judges began to show him respect. They believed he was creating safety. They believed he was helping London become orderly again. But the criminals knew the truth, and some of them hated him for it, because Jonathan Wilde was betraying them. When a thief refused to obey him, Wilde miraculously solved that crime, delivered the thief to the authorities, and enjoyed the reward money. To the public, he was a champion of justice. To the criminals, he was a tyrant. And the tension between these two worlds began to grow. His influence expanded so much that people began calling him the Thief-Taker General, the highest authority in catching criminals, even though no such official rank existed. This was before Scotland Yard, before police uniforms, before the idea of detectives. Wilde was the first man the public trusted to investigate wrongdoing. And yet those same investigations were often crimes he orchestrated himself. This contradiction made him powerful and unstable. The more Jonathan Wilde played both sides, the more dangerous his world became. Criminals feared him. Judges admired him, and ordinary citizens worshipped him. But power comes with cracks, and a man who walks the line between justice and corruption eventually loses his balance. The turning point began quietly, with a single thief who refused to kneel. A thief unlike the others, fiercer, more independent. A man who didn't fear Wilde's influence or his threats. A man who would become the key to Jonathan Wilde's downfall. His name was Jack Shepard. At the time, Jack Shepard was an unknown thief, a nobody. But he had two qualities that terrified Wilde more than any weapon. He was clever, and he was unpredictable. Wilde wanted control. Shepard wanted freedom. And two men with opposite visions cannot share the same shadow. Wilde tried to intimidate him, to bring him into his criminal empire, to make him obey. But Shepard refused. And when Shepard began stealing without Wilde's permission, Wilde made the biggest mistake of his career. He decided to destroy him. But Wilde didn't know what Shepard was capable of. And soon, he would become the most famous escape artist in British history, breaking out of prisons again and again, with methods so clever that crowds gathered just to hear rumors of how he had done it. As Shepard rose, Wilde felt his power slipping. Because for the first time, he couldn't catch the thief he wanted to. And the public noticed. They began questioning Wilde. They began asking how this unknown criminal could outsmart the man Britain trusted most. Doubt spread like smoke in a crowded room. Wilde felt something he had never felt before: fear. And beneath all this chaos, a transformation was happening, one that would outlive both men. Britain was learning, watching, studying, observing how Wilde investigated, how he tracked people, how he kept records, how he interrogated suspects, how he pieced together stories. Even if Wilde himself was corrupt, his methods weren't. He was unintentionally teaching Britain how to be a nation of detectives. And from the ashes of his downfall, a new system would rise, one that had never existed before. A system of real detectives, Real investigations, real justice. But not yet. Because Jonathan Wild's story had one more twist, one more betrayal, one more dramatic fall from power that would shake London to its core. And it all began with a mistake he never saw coming. Jonathan Wild believed he had built an empire no one could touch. But empires don't collapse from the outside. They collapse from a single crack within, a small weakness that spreads until everything falls apart. And for Wild, that crack was named Jack Shepard. Shepard's escapes were not just crimes, they were performances. Every time the authorities locked him up, he slipped out with a mix of luck, genius, and audacity that London had never seen. People gathered in taverns, whispering his name like he was a folk hero. Women adored him. Men admired him. Children dreamed of him. He became larger than life, an outlaw who embarrassed the entire justice system. And every escape, every rumor, every whispered ballad about Shepard was a slap across Wild's face. Because if Jack Shepard was unstoppable, then Jonathan Wild was powerless. Wild didn't just want Shepard arrested. He wanted him broken, humiliated, erased. But the more Wild tightened his grip, the more Shepard slipped through like smoke through fingers. The truth is, Shepard exposed Wild's greatest weakness. His entire reputation depended on his ability to find and catch criminals. If Shepard continued to outsmart him, the illusion of Wild's brilliance would shatter. And it did. One autumn evening, as rain tapped against the windows of London taverns, a rumor began to spread. A rumor so dangerous that even Wild's closest allies hesitated to repeat it. They whispered that Jonathan Wild wasn't catching thieves at all. He was controlling them. That he wasn't a hero, but the mastermind behind the city's crime waves. That the solutions he proudly delivered were nothing more than tricks built from his own corruption. At first, people laughed it off. How could the man who returned so many stolen goods be the one orchestrating the thefts? But then a second rumor appeared, then a third, then a fourth. Patterns started forming. Stories began aligning. And eventually, someone made the connection that changed everything. Every criminal Wild captured had one thing in common. None of them worked for him. By now, Wild's enemies were watching closely. Criminals he had betrayed, judges he had manipulated, informants he had pressured. They had all kept their mouths shut because Wild was too powerful. But power is fragile, and once people sense it slipping, they turn. The turning point came on a night Wild wasn't prepared for. A messenger arrived, breathless, coat-soaked, holding information that would ignite the downfall. Jack Shepard had escaped again. Not in secret, not quietly, but in a way that made half the city cheer. This time, Shepard did something unthinkable. After slipping out of his cell, he didn't hide. He didn't flee London. He walked straight into the busiest part of the city, stood beneath a street lamp, raised his voice, and publicly accused Jonathan Wild of treachery. In that moment, Wild's empire cracked. Shepard became the face of rebellion, a symbol of freedom, a living testament that Wild's system was a farce. Songs were written, posters were drawn, newspapers printed exaggerated tales, and every word, every melody, every whisper pushed Wild closer to ruin. But Jonathan Wild wasn't the type of man to go down quietly. He had spent years manipulating the underworld, bending law and crime to his will. He wouldn't surrender. He wouldn't beg. He wouldn't accept defeat. Instead, he set a trap so carefully designed that even Shepard didn't see it coming. Wild used his last remaining influence with the magistrates, spreading lies that Shepard was planning a massive robbery. He bribed officers, planted evidence, and waited. Eventually, London caught up with Shepard again. He was dragged into custody like a prize trophy, exhausted but defiant, a smile still tugging at the corner of his mouth because he believed he could escape again. But Wilde had made sure this prison was different. Guards doubled, chains reinforced, doors bolted. Wilde even arranged for Shepard to be shackled in ways no prisoner had ever been shackled before. And for the first time, Shepard could not break free. Shepard's upcoming execution was announced. The city fell silent. Some prayed for him, others celebrated his capture. But all eyes turned to Wilde, waiting to see how he would capitalize on his old enemy's downfall. Yet something unexpected happened. While Shepard awaited the gallows, the public's admiration didn't fade, it grew. Crowds gathered outside the prison just to catch a glimpse of him through iron bars. Writers published heroic poems about his cunning escapes. Ordinary people, people Wilde once manipulated and controlled, began to question everything about the so-called thief-taker general. Because the more they celebrated Shepard, the more they resented Wilde. That resentment quickly transformed into suspicion, and suspicion became investigation. For the first time, people demanded answers. They wanted to know how Wilde found stolen goods so easily. They wanted to know why certain criminals disappeared only after angering him. They wanted to know why Shepard seemed personally targeted, as if Wilde held a private vendetta. Judges who once relied on Wilde's information suddenly began reviewing old cases. Merchants Wilde helped started retelling their stories with less certainty. Even his own network of thieves began leaking secrets, hoping to save themselves before Wilde's influence collapsed entirely. Wilde could feel the walls closing in. London was changing. The era when corruption could hide behind skill was ending. A new kind of order was taking shape, one born out of frustration, betrayal, and the desperate need for justice. The public didn't just want criminals caught anymore. They wanted truth. They wanted laws. They wanted real investigators, not self-appointed vigilantes. Wilde had tried to shape the criminal world into something he controlled. Now, it was shaping itself into something that no longer needed him. The moment that sealed his fate came shortly after Shepard's execution. The cheers for Shepard were louder than the silence for Wilde's reputation. And in that noise, those shouts, those murmurs, those rebellious songs spreading through London, Wilde heard the one thing he spent his life avoiding: the sound of a city waking up. People demanded his arrest. They demanded a trial. They demanded that the man who claimed to fight crime face justice for his own. And soon, he would. But before Jonathan Wilde faced judgment, Britain's government took notice of what was happening. They saw a city desperate for order, a population hungry for real protection, a society on the edge of chaos because they had allowed a man like Wilde to act as the nation's only detective. And in that realization, something historic began forming behind closed doors. A new idea, a radical idea, an idea that would change the country and the world forever. The idea of real, official, trained detectives. But that transformation would only begin once Jonathan Wilde's story reached its tragic, dramatic end. A fall unlike anything Britain had ever witnessed. Jonathan Wilde could feel the city turning against him long before the authorities arrived at his door. For years he had walked through London as if he owned it, shoulders back, eyes sharp, every step confident. Now, he walked with the nervous posture of a man who'd lost control of the very shadows he once commanded. He had always believed he was untouchable. He knew every alley, every thief, every judge, every secret door in every tavern. But the funny thing about secrets is that they only stay hidden as long as people stay loyal. And loyalty, built on fear, collapses the moment fear fades. The fear was gone. When officials finally stepped into his headquarters, they expected a fight. They expected Wilde to roar like a cornered animal or escape through one of the hidden passages he had built into his empire. Instead, they found him sitting at his desk, hands folded, surrounded by ledgers filled with names, names of thieves he controlled, victims he manipulated, judges he bribed. He didn't speak a word. London erupted. People flooded the streets, shouting his name, not with admiration anymore, but anger. The same crowds that once praised him now demanded his punishment. They felt misled, betrayed, used. Wilde had played hero to an entire nation, and now that mask had shattered. His trial became the spectacle of the decade. The courtroom overflowed. Reporters scribbled notes like vultures circling a feast. Old victims came forward. Criminals confessed. Merchants testified. And every story, every accusation painted Wilde not as Britain's greatest crime fighter, but Britain's greatest fraud. The judge's words cut through the courtroom like a blade. Jonathan Wilde, you are guilty. No pleas, no excuses, no escape. For a man who once orchestrated the entire criminal world, his end was tragically simple, a sentence of execution. The empire he built through manipulation, fear, and deception collapsed in a single afternoon. But his downfall wasn't the real story. His downfall was the spark. Because while Jonathan Wilde awaited his fate, Britain was already moving forward. Wilde's corruption didn't just anger the public, it embarrassed the government. How could a nation pride itself on order when the only detective they had was a criminal mastermind playing both sides? They needed a real system. A system that didn't rely on self-appointed crime fighters. A system that didn't depend on informants and bribes. A system rooted in law, not chaos. A system that could catch criminals through skill, not intimidation. Behind closed doors, officials began drafting the framework that would eventually transform into the Metropolitan Police. They discussed organized patrols, dedicated officers, investigative divisions, and records, real records, not the secret ledgers of Jonathan Wilde. They didn't know it at the time, but they were building the foundation of modern detective work. And they were doing it because Jonathan Wilde proved what happened without it. On the day of his execution, thousands gathered, not out of hatred, but curiosity. This was the man who fooled an entire city. This was the man who played hero and villain at the same time. This was the man whose double life pushed a nation to confront its own broken system. As Wilde was led to the gallows, he didn't beg, he didn't scream, he didn't proclaim innocence. He simply looked out at the crowd with a strange, almost peaceful expression, as if he finally understood that his story was never just about crime. It was about change. The trap he created for others had finally closed on him. And then, silence. With Wilde gone, London exhaled. But something else filled that empty space. A new expectation. People had seen what one man could do when left unsupervised. They wanted better. They wanted trained investigators. They wanted someone who solved crimes because it was justice, not profit. It would take years, but eventually that demand created real detectives. Men who studied evidence, interviewed witnesses, followed clues. Men who worked for the law, not against it. Jonathan Wilde didn't become the world's first detective, but he forced the world to invent one. His story was a warning, a blueprint, a catalyst for a new era where crime could be fought with reason, not corruption. Logic, not fear. Skill, not deception. And decades later, when Arthur Conan Doyle imagined Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant mind walking London's foggy streets, spotting clues no one else could see, solving mysteries with method instead of muscle, he wasn't writing in a vacuum. He was writing in a world shaped by the chaos Jonathan Wild left behind. Sherlock became the detective Wild never could be: honest, rational, trustworthy, and dedicated to justice. But the irony remains. Before Sherlock ever existed in fiction, there was a real man walking those same streets, creating the very problems that would force Britain to build the system Holmes later represented. A man who solved crimes before detectives existed. A man who created criminals and caught them. A man whose downfall awakened a nation. Jonathan Wild was not a hero. He was not a visionary. He was the storm that forced Britain to build a lighthouse. And because of that, history remembers him not for his crimes, but for what came after. The birth of real detective work. The dawn of criminal investigation. The moment Britain realized it needed men who followed truth, not profit. Long before Sherlock Holmes stepped into 221B Baker Street, before magnifying glasses and forensic science, before crime labs and criminal profiles, there was a man standing alone in a chaotic London, proving to the world that crime could never be left in the hands of criminals. His legacy was not his life, but what his life forced others to create: the detective.